NASCAR is no stranger to unique characters. One could actually make a pretty compelling argument that those people are more of a draw to the sport than the actual product out there on the track. Throughout its 80-plus year history, we have seen all manner of thousands of different men and women roll the dice on stock car racing's biggest stage. From kings to silver foxes, from humble mechanics racing part-time to rich playboys just trying their hand at going fast. But by my count, out of those thousands, only around 400 have ever won a race in NASCAR's top 3 touring series. Just in the Cup Series alone, we have nearly 3,000 individuals who have cranked up their engines to start a race, and only 191 have ever actually crossed the line in first in at least one of those starts. Winning a race in one of the 3 big leagues of stock car racing is an extremely difficult task that involves gobs of money getting flung around, an absurd amount of raw talent, mixed with a high level of experience you can't get anywhere else except by just turning laps, and of course, a little bit of luck. Not only are you battling the laws of physics and your own fear, but you're doing this dance with a 3,000-pound hunk of steel that has the aerodynamic properties of a brick, with a 20-something gallon tank of highly flammable liquid strapped to the back, with 20 to 40 other guys and gals trying their best to beat you to the line. Over the course of hours, sweltering in a metal coffin that can reach temperatures of up to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. What kinds of people do this? Better yet, what kinds of people like doing this and are good at it? Who are these lucky few hundred? What makes them tick? Well, let's find out. If you've ever played Dungeons & Dragons before, or you're just a denizen of the internet like me, you'll recognize this immediately as an alignment chart. It's got 2 axes. One looks at lawfulness and chaos, the other one looks at good and evil. One determines whether or not you follow the spirit of the law, the other one looks at whether or not you follow the letter of the law. Outside of D&D, this is probably one of the oldest internet memes, and you can use it to easily label any group of things or characters for your own enjoyment. It quite literally goes with anything. What type of media port you use, Game of Thrones characters, you name it, and you can fit it into an alignment chart. NASCAR isn't any different, so let's get into it. But where to start? You know, NASCAR has always been called a sport of good old boys, so why not start with the truest form of good there is? Lawful good. These are guys who follow the rules, respect their competitors, and are generally well liked by fans due to their honorable nature. These are guys like Benny Parsons, Chase Elliott, and his old man Bill Elliott. Guys like this work hard, race hard, and get the results to show for it at the end of the day. All without pissing anybody off and keeping the fans on their side. Bill Elliott won Most Popular Driver of the Year honors 16 times in his career, and likely would have won more if he hadn't requested that his name be removed from the ballot in 2002 just so other drivers could have a chance. But lawful good drivers have a nasty habit, one that will test even their most ardent supporters through all of the heartache and occasional nausea, and we'll get into that in greater detail in just a minute or two. But I think there is one man who epitomizes lawful good more than any other driver, and that is none other than my favorite race car driver of all time, Mark Martin. Mark Martin won nearly 100 races in NASCAR's top 3 divisions. He was also one of the first guys to utilize a strenuous physical fitness regimen to give himself an edge out on the track, so that he could better endure the harsh conditions inside of a race car for longer periods of time. Mark was beloved by fans and drivers alike, and he rarely, if ever, had a heated word to say towards anybody. He raced everybody around him cleanly, and his competitors responded in kind. This fair give-and-take style helped Mark to win a lot of races, but Mark Martin also finished second, disturbingly often. He won 40 races in NASCAR's top series, but he ended up with 61 runner-up finishes. He was 50% more likely to finish second than he was to win. In the Cup Series, this is unprecedented for drivers with his win total. Most have more wins than runner-ups, but for those who have more second-place honors, it's usually at least pretty close. But Mark breaks this chart. Oddly enough, another all-around good guy, Harry Gant, pops up here too. He won 18 races but finished second 35 times. He was nearly twice as likely to be the runner-up than he was to win. Bill and Chase Elliott, they finished second 8 times before they won their first respective races. But the heartbreak doesn't end by just coming up short more often than winning. For Mark Martin, it was all about when and where he finished second. There was the heart-wrenching loss at the 2007 Daytona 500, where Mark had the car to beat, but a late green-white checkered saw Kevin Harvick come from way back in the field in just 2 laps to nudge Mark out at the line. It was just the 4th lap, Kevin Harvick led all day. Mark finished second at the Brickyard 400 twice, and in general struggled to notch off victories in marquee events. But there was no bigger Achilles heel of his than Pocono. For a man so good at winning races on the big tracks and road courses, including 3 wins in a row at Watkins Glen, you'd think that the 2.5-mile tricky triangle of Pocono would be a natural fit for him, and it was. It was far and away one of his best tracks. He had 20 top 5 finishes there and 7 runner-ups, all without a single victory to his credit. A trip to victory lane at Pocono was forever out of reach to him. This role as the bridesmaid even extended to his championship pursuits. He finished second in the championship hunt 5 separate times to 4 different drivers across nearly 2 decades of competition. In 1990 and 1994, he finished second to Dale Earnhardt. In 1998, he had his absolute best season, notching off 8 victories, including a win in the All-Star race. He finished second to Jeff Gordon, who got a record-tying 13 victories that year. In 2002, he faltered late in the year and finished second to Tony Stewart. And in 2009, he seemed like he had it in the bag, nabbing 5 wins, including the first race of the chase, only to be outdone by his teammate, Jimmy Johnson. Mark Martin had the misfortune of being one of the greatest drivers of all time, while he was competing against the greatest drivers of all time. In NASCAR, nice guys don't finish last, but they do finish second. A lot. Well, that was sad. So let's go for some more lighthearted fare then. How about some guys who are wildly inconsistent? You can never quite tell what they're going to do at any given race day. But when they do show up and perform, man, they can light up the charts and make themselves alone worth the price of admission. These glass cannons are guys like Ricky Craven and Jimmy Spencer. Yeah, they only won 2 races a pop in the Cup Series, but they had some of the closest and wildest finishes to their name. I mean, Jimmy Spencer's nickname was Mr. Excitement, and he lived up to it too, chalking up the closest finish in NASCAR history in the same year electronic timing and scoring came on board in 1994. That record would stand until Ricky Craven would obliterate it in 2003 at Darlington in what has got to be the epitome of beating and banging to the line. Sure, they were never really a threat to win week in and week out, and championships were never a serious consideration, but when they were good, they were damned good. Trevor Bayne got his only career victory in the Cup Series at the Daytona 500 in 2011. And he did it at such a young age, he wasn't even old enough to drink the champagne they sprayed on him in Victory Lane. It really wasn't a fluke either. He had been bad fast all the speed weeks, and Jeff Gordon had even picked him out to be his preferred drafting partner. Late in the event, he threw a mean block on Carl Edwards and notched his first and only top-tier series win. But I don't think anyone epitomizes chaotic good better than Jamie McMurray. He won in just his second start ever in 2002, subbing in for an injured Sterling Marlin. He straight up outran the champion from 2 seasons ago, Bobby Labonte, and walked away with his first win. It would take him 5 more years to notch win number 2, and after that another 2 years to get win number 3 at Talladega in 2009. The next year he would be let go by Roush Racing and move over to Ganassi in 2010, where he would have his breakout season. He started off by winning the Daytona 500, the biggest race of all, and then followed it up by winning the second biggest race, the Brickyard 400. He chalked up 1 more victory before the year was out, and just a few more before his career was up, including a win at the 2014 All-Star race where he flat out beat Carl Edwards in a late race shootout in what has got to be one of the last great All-Star finishes. Other than that and a few absolutely incredible saves, he was a fairly unremarkable driver. But those occasional flashes of brilliance are part and parcel of what makes a chaotic good driver. Shining gold surrounded by the mundane, a diamond in the rough. Let's check out the other side of the board for a bit. How about chaotic good's edgier brother, chaotic evil? Surely the Busch brothers have to be mentioned here, as they've been known to butt heads with all manner of drivers for various reasons. In the early 90s, Rusty Wallace had pissed off plenty of people with his antics, and all 3 drivers were one-off champions who had a tendency to be as inconsistent as they were brutish. But I don't think anybody can compare to the embodiment of chaotic evil in NASCAR that is the man in black, the Intimidator, Dale Earnhardt Sr. Dale Earnhardt Sr. had no qualms about booting other people out of the way, or just flat out wrecking them to get ahead. But conversely, he was a man of great empathy as well. When Ayrton Senna in F1 and Davey Allison in NASCAR both died in 1994 and 1993 respectively, it was Sr. who won the following races both times. And both times he was visibly shaken and moved. He said of Davey, "I'd run second to him in a heartbeat if it meant it could bring him back." It was rare to catch his soft side, but it was there. However, when you mention Dale Earnhardt Sr., most people don't remember that. What they do remember is him wrecking their favorite driver. A man of such dualities and talent must have confounded NASCAR's old breed, who saw this young guy from rural North Carolina come into the sport in the late 70s and early 80s, who apparently had no interest in paying his dues and instead seemed just absolutely hell-bent on making the NASCAR world conform to his will. In just his second full-time season, he won the championship, and would go on to win it a total of 7 times. And true to chaos, sometimes he won those championships in dominating fashion, like in 1987 and 1990, winning 10 and 9 races respectively. Other times he would just barely squeak them out, like in 1991 where he won just 4. In 1993 he won the championship with 6 wins compared to Rusty Wallace's 10, but Rusty was just too chaotic for his own good, and his average finishing position was worse, giving Senior the title. On the track he was absolutely ruthless. If he managed to catch you and fill up your rearview mirror, he was just as likely to make a legitimate pass as he was to just punt you out of the way. In 1993, in the Coca-Cola 600, he found himself way behind the leader after a pit penalty. He needed a caution to get back into contention, so he just created one and spun out Greg Sacks. NASCAR saw this and said no way, and put him 1 lap down. Dale Sr., out of sheer spite and tenacity, ended up overcoming this under green and went on to win the race anyway. After his passing in 2001, people looked back on the Intimidator fondly, but in his heyday, NASCAR fans were understandably quite split on Big E. I remember vividly sitting in the stands as a kid at the All-Star races in the 90s, and during driver intros, people would boo him mercilessly, more than any other driver. At Charlotte Motor Speedway no less, just a short drive down the highway from his hometown of Kannapolis. His hometown crowd booed him. But Dale trudged on to victory after victory, championship after championship. How does a man manage to win that much while making so many enemies? Well, not giving a shit helps. To show you how little he gave a shit sometimes, I'm going to show you what I think is the quintessential Intimidator moment. It wasn't some short track bump and run, or a big block en route to a restrictor plate win. Nope, it was the last race of the 1992 season, the Hooters 500 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Going into this race, we had 6 drivers mathematically eligible to win the championship, and none of them were Dale Earnhardt. 3 of them were long shots. Mark Martin, Harry Gant, and Kyle Petty pretty much needed a miracle to win. But the other 3, Davey Allison, Alan Kawicki, and Bill Elliott, were in a dead heat. Earnhardt had a miserable 92 campaign. After coming off back-to-back championships, everybody expected him to make a run at Kel Yarborough's record and get 3 straight, but fate would say otherwise. He qualified on the second row behind Rick Mast and Brett Bodine, 2 guys with just 1 victory between them, and who saw an opportunity to nab a win while the big dogs were playing at safer points. However, going into the first turn on the second lap, Earnhardt wrecks both of them. Why? Simple. He just didn't give a shit. And he certainly didn't give a shit that all 6 of the championship-eligible drivers were behind him when this happened. Somehow, all 6 made it through with only Davey Allison taking some minor damage to his quarter panel. It slowed his car down enough, however, that he spent dozens of laps trying to correct it. When he finally got it squared away, Swervin' Ernie Irvan lost it coming out of 4 and collected Davey, who was marching his way up through the field. Yep, Dale Sr. indirectly ruined Davey Allison's 1992 championship quest because he was salty about having a bad season, and decided the pulse hitters weren't going fast enough on lap 2. Again, few men gave as few shits as Dale Earnhardt. But such is the nature of chaotic evil, just as likely to race you clean as they are to race you dirty. And when they do you wrong, chances are even they themselves couldn't explain why they did it, because chaos just doesn't give a shit. Chaos is a bit of a head scratcher to be sure. But you know what's simple and easy enough to wrap your head around? Evil. All drivers want to win week in and week out, but only one can go to victory circle at the end of the day. Sure, you can embrace chaos like Dale Earnhardt Sr., say to hell with the rules and just do as you please. But as we've already established, that's woefully inconsistent. But what if you didn't break the rules, but just bent them enough to get away with it and made sure you would win? Let's talk a minute about lawful evil. There's an old saying in racing, if you ain't cheating, you ain't winning. Everyone does it, and even your favorite driver isn't immune from it, although they probably drove a questionably legal car unwittingly. We could talk about Flexgate from the previous season, where rear window bracing would give way at high speeds to redirect more air towards the spoiler, or Spingate, where Clint Boyer spun himself out on purpose to give his teammate Martin Truex a better shot at getting into the chase. In both cases, NASCAR penalized the respective parties rather arbitrarily, being that there was technically no rule in place at the time to brake. Jeff Gordon's T-Rex car at the 1997 All-Star race was so dominant that NASCAR effectively banned it the next day, and told crew chief Ray Evernham to never bring it back to a racetrack ever again. You see, the best way to break a rule is to break it before it's even in the books, and there has to be no better master of loopholes and forward thinking than Junior Johnson. It's often joked that Junior Johnson essentially wrote half of the existing NASCAR rulebook due to his many shenanigans, but a lot of truth is said in jest. A bootlegger from North Carolina bopped multiple times for running illegal moonshine, Junior Johnson won 50 races as a driver and 6 championships as a car owner. Coming from rural North Carolina, you might just write him off as another country bumpkin based on his slow manner of speaking and his deep southern drawl, but nothing could be further from the truth. Had he been born to the right family, he could have become a famous trial lawyer, or a Francis Underwood-esque legislator. He knew how to weasel his way around the rules like no one else in his era or since. The list of things Junior Johnson has invented or discovered and introduced into NASCAR is just staggering. Drafting, he discovered that. The Twisted Sister concept, he invented that. Constant wind tunnel testing for every single new car built, he started doing that first. He didn't like the way his jackman was taking so long on pit stops, so he became the jackman himself, and invented the jack swing, which had the added benefit of taking out NASCAR officials trying to count lug nuts. NASCAR didn't like that, declared him an illegal jackman, and made the jack swing illegal, and instituted rules for who could and couldn't go over the wall for a pit stop, thus giving rise to designated pit crew members and essentially inventing the choreographed pit stop as we know it. He shaved down pistons by fractions of a millimeter just so they'd fire off a little bit faster. He brought in F1 engineers to glean off information and know-how off of them. In 1966, he took advantage of a manufacturer boycott to enter a 66 Ford Galaxy into the race that was so disgustingly illegal that it now sits in the NASCAR Hall of Fame as his greatest work. And that's just the stuff we know about. But there was no better example of his nefarious ways than the car he put into the very first All-Star race in 1985. Driven by Darrell Waltrip, this one-of-a-kind car had a bad fast motor and had just barely skated through pre-race tech inspection, and was now poised to make back the stupid amount of money used to build it in its very first start. Harry Gant got the leg up on DW thanks to better pit strategy, but Junior Johnson's Frankenstein creation ran him down and edged him out with a late race pass for the lead. As soon as Darrell Waltrip crossed the line to take the checkered flag, however, the engine blew all to pieces, and rumors immediately came flying from every direction. Most speculated that Waltrip had clutched the engine and over-revved it on purpose so it would blow. That way it wouldn't be subjected to inspection. After all, it's hard to inspect an engine when it's in a million tiny pieces littered across the track. Some even posited the opinion that Junior had put a remote explosive in the engine. A far-fetched theory to be sure, but the fact that it was even up for consideration is testament to Junior Johnson's conniving nature and his mile-long rap sheet. NASCAR inspected what was left of the car and the motor, and everything was in order as best as they could tell. 7 out of 8 cylinders were intact and up to spec. The 8th? Well, it's in pieces out in Concord, North Carolina somewhere. Probably sifted into the dirt beneath the speedway by now. NASCAR begrudgingly handed Junior Johnson his check, and he laughed his happy ass all the way to the bank. NASCAR fans will often muse out loud that if Junior Johnson had what we have today at his disposal, he would be unstoppable. But the men who drove for him will fire back with, "How do you know he didn't?" Let's go ahead and knock the evil third of the board out with neutral evil. Finding neutrality in an evil act can be difficult to nail down, but Cale Yarborough seems to fit the bill pretty well. Nicknamed Old Hickory, he was a tough-as-nails driver from South Carolina, who asked no quarter of his competitors and none was given. His most famous act was wrecking Donnie Allison in the 1979 Daytona 500, and then fighting him and his brother Bobby Allison in the infield after the fact. And this is where the neutral bit comes in. Wrecking Donnie Allison wasn't against the rules and he was trying to make a last lap pass. No ill will intended. Shit happens. But nonetheless, Cale found himself in shit more often than not. Same goes for the likes of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. or even the man who drove for Junior Johnson over there the next box over, Darrell Waltrip. Darrell was a fast-talking, charismatic guy from Owensboro, Kentucky, who quickly became a fan favorite. In an era where TV time was rare and scared off most drivers, Darrell quickly embraced the new form of media entering the sport. Had he been starting his career out today, he would no doubt have hundreds of thousands of followers on every single imaginable form of social media. After a run-in with Cale Yarborough at Darlington, Old Hickory gave him a new moniker, Jaws. His car could almost run as fast as his mouth, they would say about him. However, 84 times, his car actually did outrun his mouth, and he found himself in victory lane infuriatingly often. His game wasn't to boot you out of the way or find some sort of twist in the rules to exploit, but to just psych you out. This psychological warfare was brutally effective, and whether he drove for himself, Dyegard, or Junior Johnson, his opponents were known to have odd and misfortunate occurrences strike them at the most inopportune moments. Bobby Allison awoke on the morning of the final race of the 1983 season in the midst of a dogfight with Darrell Waltrip for the championship, only to find the gas tank of his car filled with sand. Others would find lug nuts missing just minutes before the command to fire engines, or their spoilers positioned at odd angles. Was Darrell Waltrip the man behind this? The behavior followed him wherever he went, but nobody could draw a line connecting him. On the track, however, he would race you in bewildering fashion. He would catch you and do one of two things: either make a crazy bonsai pass as if to say, hey, I can do this crazy move this early in the race and not give a rip, can you? Or he would just ride on your bumper or quarter panel, like some annoying asshole on the interstate would do. Not trying to make a pass or anything, but just to let you know that he was there and he could do whatever he wanted to at any moment. Almost like a cat playing with a mouse before he eats it. Say what you will about him or his antics, it led him to 3 championships and a stupid number of race wins, which included 7 wins in a row at Bristol, one of the toughest racetracks on the circuit. He was so good there they even named a section of grandstands after him. In true neutral evil fashion, the man got results. While we're on the subject of neutrality, let's drift on over to Lawful Neutral. What we're looking for here are guys who follow the letter of the law, but have some ethical issues to hammer out. They'll cooperate with you and race you clean to an extent, but that doesn't mean that they're going to race you easy, or play fair when the chips are down. Take Ryan Newman for example, a driver that is notoriously difficult to pass. Whether it's lap 1 or just 1 to go, he will race you just as hard in either instance, often to the ire of his opponents and teammates alike. Is this smart? I don't know, it seems to have worked for him so far. He's won a slew of races. It may be dumb to race everyone that hard for that long, but then again, it's not his job to let people pass him. He gets paid to go out there and race hard, and not give up positions. Brad Keselowski won his very first race by faking high, ducking down low, and when Carl Edwards went for the double block, Brad turned hard right into him, so that at least he would make it through. Ethically questionable? Sure, but what else was he supposed to do? Carl threw a late block and was going to wreck regardless. It's not Brad's job to make sure things work out fairly, he's trying to win a race. Tony Stewart would do the exact same thing later that year at Daytona to Kyle Busch, and no one seems to have an issue with that. But the modern day king of Lawful Neutral has to be Bad Brad's current teammate, Joey Logano. Has Joey done some very sketchy things out on the track? Absolutely. But just about every single time they were within the rules of NASCAR and not only permissible, but actually encouraged. In 2013, he and Denny Hamlin were battling it out on the last lap in California and they both wreck. Denny is hurt so bad that he misses several races. But hey, Joey's going for the win in the final corner of the last lap with a point system that values winning above all else. He's not supposed to give in here. In 2015, he and Matt Kenseth are in a dogfight for the championship. With the current knockout style of playoff in place, Joey and Matt both need a win at Kansas. Joey gets a huge run on the front stretch and Matt goes to block. Joey holds his line and dumps him. Was this a chicken shit move? No doubt. But when you go to block a guy who's that much faster than you, what do you honestly expect? Matt Kenseth would have his revenge a few weeks later at Martinsville and effectively ruined Logano's 2015 championship run. But the quintessential Lawful Neutral moment of his, the 2018 Martinsville playoff race. Joey needs a win to punch his ticket into the next round, and on the last lap, he has just one man to beat, the defending champion, Martin Truex Jr. He gives him the old bump and run out of turn 4 and wins the race. Truex wasn't too happy about it and had this to say after the race.
May won the battle, but he ain't win the damn war.
Spoiler alert, he won the damn war. With a power move to the outside in the closing laps of the last race of the season, he clinched the cup by winning the race outright. Was this move back in Martinsville dirty? Kind of, yeah, but he had to do that. Just the next week in Phoenix, Logano would wreck out and the only thing keeping him in the championship hunt was his win earlier in the round. Joey rightly calls that Martinsville car his championship car, because without that bump and run, he doesn't make it into the last round of the chase and isn't the 2018 champion. Is that fair? Probably not, but those were the rules in place at the time, and you can hardly blame him for abiding by the rules and doing exactly what they encourage him to do. That's just Lawful Neutral for you. There's only a few spaces left on the chart, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. So why don't we go dead center and check out True Neutral then? It only seems appropriate. The True Neutral has no strong feelings one way or the other. They are neither good nor evil, neither lawful nor chaotic. You would think that such drivers wouldn't be that interesting, but in true neutral fashion, they're a little all over the place. There's Bobby Isaac, the 1970 Cup champion, who rarely gave interviews or talked to the press at any length. He was NASCAR's biggest loner, but he did somehow still have fans. He was a tough racer, and that's all that matters to some people. He was also a rabid independent, a sort of radical centrist, if you will. When a NASCAR drivers union popped up in 1969, the Professional Drivers Association, he opted out immediately. Why? I don't think he had any pro-business or anti-union convictions. I just don't think he liked anybody else speaking on his behalf. We could talk about the litany of young, squeaky clean guys entering the sport right now, who fans complain that they all have the personality of sandpaper. I say give them a few years, develop some rivalries, and they'll be alright. But for true neutrality, one man stands alone at the top of the pile. One man currently embodies the spirit of the true neutral better than anyone piloting a race car. That man is Paul Menard. I want you to do something for me real quick. Google image search Paul Menard and try to find a picture of him smiling. It's harder than you might think. Even when you do run across the rare picture of him smiling, it just kinda seems awkward. Like he knows which facial muscles to use, but the act itself is still very foreign to him. It doesn't come naturally. He doesn't get outwardly emotional at all, and even the way he races is just kind of blasé. His wins are also without panache. He doesn't win by making daring moves at the last second or by showboating. He usually just quietly pulls away and comes out with the W. His one and only Cup Series win comes in probably the most neutral way imaginable, by fuel mileage. There's no mystique or flashiness in that. It's just math, mixed in with a little bit of guesswork, and all throughout, Paul Menard remains stoic. Oh hey, there's that smile. Next, let's head north a bit and look at Neutral Good. The Neutral Good plays by the rules when it suits his case, but isn't afraid to mix things up on occasion to win the crowd over. Matt Kenseth fits this bill perfectly. He had a habit of qualifying poorly only to show up on race day with a fast car and slice his way through the field and put on a show, much to the admiration of the NASCAR nation. And after he spun himself out trying to edge out Dave Blaney at the line in Charlotte, no one doubted his drive to win. Carl Edwards also had a bunch of fans, and while his occasional chaotic side would drive some people away, they'd always come right back. His run-ins with Kyle Busch at Bristol were of special importance to us Cousin Carl fans. But the absolute king of Neutral Good drivers is, well, obviously, the king himself, Richard Petty. King Richard, first of his name, is the winningest driver in NASCAR's top series by a long shot, almost doubling the win total of the runner-up. But what's most interesting about this tear through the NASCAR record books is that he stayed on the good side of the NASCAR fan base throughout. Whereas Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon's hot streaks would irk most NASCAR fans, in the same way Tom Brady pisses off NFL fans today, Richard Petty won week in and week out without ever having the fans turn on him. How did he do this? Well, oddly enough, by all the times he didn't win. He'd lose squeakers to the likes of Bobby Isaac, Benny Parsons, and most notably, David Pearson. He and Pearson have 305 wins between them, and they finished 1-2 63 of those times, with Pearson getting the better of him 33-30. Petty wasn't just a popular driver because he won a lot. He was popular because when he won, he had to earn it against the best that have ever been. When Pearson and Petty found themselves in each other's company up towards the front, they were about to make history happen almost every single time. There's the 1974 Firecracker 400 where Pearson played dead on the last lap and let Petty pass him, just so he could take away Petty's slingshot pass and use it for himself. 2 years later, the two would find themselves running 1-2 at Daytona again, but this time in the 500. They would slam into each other coming out of 4 and wreck in the infield. They were so far ahead of third place that whoever could fire up their engine first and limp across the line would be declared the winner. Pearson was able to get his Mercury to roll over first and staggered across the line for his first and only Daytona 500 crown, while Petty had to have his crew push his wreck to the finish. The two men played cat and mouse with each other for decades, and never shied away from toying with the other for their own amusement. They were pretty much made for each other. Late in life, Richard Petty and David Pearson would be interviewed and asked who they thought the best driver of all time was. Richard Petty, without hesitation, pointed towards David Pearson. Pearson just smiled and said, "I agree with Richard." The racing gods are mostly fair and just. Those who work the hardest, have the most talent, and pay their due diligence usually end up with the W. But every once in a while, during the quiet deliberations amongst said racing gods, Lady Chaos stumbles into the room in a drunken stupor, throws up her hands, and just declares a winner, whether anybody in the room or the appointed winner likes it or not. All your hard work, sacrifice, and money can be all for naught if just a few factors go the wrong way. It is entirely possible to win a NASCAR race by sheer goddamned accident. It's happened before and it'll happen again. So let's go practice the dark arts of scoring a NASCAR win. Let's take a dance with Lady Chaos and the pale moonlight and see what happens. Let's take a look at Chaotic Neutral. The most obvious weird way to win a NASCAR race is the rain-shortened race. It's a rule in most racing series that if you get past the halfway point in a race, and weather causes the race to be postponed and it cannot be restarted in a, quote, reasonable amount of time, then whoever was first at the time of caution will be declared the winner. Now, what constitutes a reasonable amount of time varies from person to person, and NASCAR has, of course, flubbed this one over the years. In 2009, the Daytona 500 got a caution due to rain past the halfway point. Daytona has lights, so they could have waited it out, but instead, just before 7 p.m., after a 16-minute red flag, NASCAR called the race. As teams packed up their cars and left the track, the rain had moved out and the ground was already starting to dry up. Matt Kenseth, your 2009 Daytona 500 winner, folks. Conversely, in November of 1998, at the last race of the season at Atlanta, NASCAR endured nearly 7 hours worth of on and off rain delays, until at 11 o'clock at night, Jeff Gordon won his 13th race of the season and was crowned the champion. What made this decision to run it out all the way until almost midnight even more baffling was the fact that Jeff Gordon had locked up the championship in the previous race. There was literally no need to see this one out other than I guess NASCAR just really wanted Jeff to get the record-tying 13th win of the season. As you might suspect, a lot of drivers have gotten their first win due to rain-shortened races. Joey Logano got his first win at a rain-shortened race at Loudon, New Hampshire in 2009. Eric Almirola got his first win thanks to a rain-shortened race at Daytona during the summer race, but that's nothing compared to the weird way he won his first Xfinity Series race, because when he won that race, he wasn't even driving the car when the checkered flag flew. Now we get to the driver replacement victory. In NASCAR, whoever starts the car at the drop of the green flag gets credited with the finishing position of that car, even if they get replaced at any point during the race. Usually this is due to driver sickness or injury. Maybe you have enough strength to start the race and get to the first cycle of pit stops, but you need somebody else to drive the car for the remainder of the race. Eric Almirola started the 2007 AT&T 250 at the Milwaukee Mile driving for Joe Gibbs Racing. He nabbed the pole and led the race for the first 43 laps until his car owner made the call. Put Denny Hamlin in the car. Was Eric sick? Nope. Hurt? Not at all. At least not until he was told to give up his dominant car to somebody else. So what gives? Well, Denny Hamlin was supposed to drive the number 20 car for the majority of the races during the 2007 Xfinity Series campaign, doing double duty in both it and the Cup Series. This wasn't an issue at the time as most of the races on the schedule were companion races at the same track on the same weekend. However, this weekend, the Xfinity Series is at the Milwaukee Mile in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Cup race is in Sonoma, California. Why was Denny Hamlin slated to run this race nearly 2,000 miles away? Well, the 20 car's primary sponsor was Rockwell Automation, and they were based out of Wisconsin. They wanted to see their star driver at their home track. Denny could have gotten there to start the race, but his helicopter couldn't find a place to land, and he was late. Joe Gibbs and Denny Hamlin want Eric to finish the race. He's got the car and the know-how. His only competition, Carl Edwards in the 60 car, has been in trouble all night. But somewhere, presumably in some smoke-filled room, Rockwell Automation convinces Joe Gibbs to yank Eric out of the car and put Denny Hamlin in. Eric was understandably furious. He didn't even stay for his own victory lane celebration. He got the points, the credit, the trophy, and the check, but if I were him, I'd spit on that trophy every morning after I got out of bed. Up next is my favorite unconventional way to win a race, the scoring error. This one has fortunately gone the way of the dodo bird thanks to electronic timing and scoring, but back in the day NASCAR officials just had to keep notes and move placards around a desk. Hopefully at the end of 5 hours everybody had been paying attention and they got it right, but not too infrequently they got it wrong. Protests were common all throughout the field, and most of the time, either rightly or wrongly, the winner was never in dispute. It's impossible to know today how many wins got muffed up along the way, but there are a few where we definitely know something fishy went down. There was, of course, the worst race ever at Talladega in 1969, where despite there being just 3 cars up to speed, only 2 of which were competitive, NASCAR still lost track of them and awarded the win to Richard Brickhouse, his first and only NASCAR Cup win. In interviews later in life, Richard seems pretty coy about admitting whether or not he thinks he actually won, while Ray Fox and Jim Vandiver are adamant that they won. Even still, Richard's win has stood the test of time and will likely never be rescinded. Remember Brett Bodine from earlier when we were talking about Earnhardt wrecking him? Well, he has just one win, and that came on a scoring error. To this day, Darrell Waltrip says that he actually won this race in 1990. And from his telling of events, it sounds like Bill France Jr. knew about the scoring error and let the win stand anyway just because it made for a good story. But my favorite scoring error has to be what would have been Richard Petty's first win at Lakewood Speedway in 1959. He's driving a 1957 Oldsmobile his dad has lent him, and he's running solidly up front all day. The checkered flag flies at the conclusion of the 150-lap main event, and as Richard Petty makes his way to Victory Circle, officials have a protest of the running order. Someone else claims they've won this race. The protester? Leigh Petty, his own father. That's right, Leigh Petty protested his son's first win, and he got the running order changed so that he won and Richard was placed in second. Now, to be fair, Richard says that he never actually thought he won that race, and was just going to roll with it just to see what would happen. Also, this was his dad's primary source of income, and he needs to put food on the table for his family and fund his race team. And Richard is just out here for funsies, racing for that exact same team that needs the money far more than he does. But man, that's just cold. I don't care who you are. So there it is, Leigh Petty, one cold-ass honky. But for all of this chaos, it still doesn't tell the full story of how crazy a NASCAR race can be at the finish. Meet the Buescher cousins. Together they have two of the most unlikely wins in NASCAR history, and the fact that they're related just makes it even more insane. First, let's start with the younger Buescher, Chris. It's August the 1st in 2016 at the second Pocono race. Like most late summer Pocono races, rain is an issue, and our old friend the rain-shortened race is looking to make another appearance. Rain's on the way according to the radar, so guys are stretching out their fuel runs as long as they can, in hopes that they'll just get lucky and be out front when the rain hits. But suddenly, something unexpected comes up. A fog bank. Fog rolls into turn 2, and pretty soon the driver spotters can't see half the track. As a safety precaution, NASCAR yellow flags the event, but as the fog gets thicker, they decide to throw the red and halt the race. Chris's team is praying for rain, but it never comes. Instead, the fog just hangs over the track, longer and longer. An hour and a half rolls by and still no rain. Turns out those radar signatures weren't picking up rain, they were picking up that fog bank. The fog just parks itself over the track, and since we're past the halfway point, NASCAR calls it. Chris Buescher becomes the first and so far only driver to my knowledge to win a race due to lack of visibility by way of fog. The elder Buescher though, his lone Xfinity Series win is even more ridiculous. It's the season opener for 2012, a 300-mile race at Daytona. Going into the final series of turns, the top 10 are running so close together that you could just about throw a blanket over them. So where's James Buescher in all of this? Well, he's not even in the frame. Let's back up a bit. That's him back there, in 11th, on the final turn of the final lap. Does that mean? Yep, the top 10 completely wreck out. James somehow weaves his way through the carnage, narrowly misses getting bodied by Brad Keselowski, and speeds to his first and only victory in the series, presumably while screaming during the entire ordeal and probably having an accident in his fire suit. Two guys, both of them cousins, getting their first and only victories in their respective series in the most unconventional and unique ways imaginable. That will probably never happen again, certainly not in my lifetime, and I can't think of a better send-off for a chaotic neutral. So there it is, the 9 types of NASCAR winners. Where does your favorite driver fit into this whole crazy, stupid thing? Sound off down in the comments and let me know. Peace.